This panel is going to follow up on the conversation we just started by talking about what it is like being on the front lines of manufacturing, because each of these individuals are on the front lines. To help us understand this topic, we're pleased to be joined by three leading experts. So Buckley Brinkman is the Executive Director and CEO of the Wisconsin Center for Manufacturing and Productivity. So we wanted to get a Midwestern perspective on some of the things we've been talking about. They have been working on a productivity project that is very interesting, so we want to hear a little bit more about that. David Brussell is Vice President and Executive Director of the Manufacturing Leadership Council of the National Association of Manufacturers. And then Cheryl Merchant is the President of Taco Comfort Solutions. And previously, she served for 19 years as President and CEO of Hope Global. So I want to start with Buckley.
Global, yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your Center for Manufacturing and what do you see in terms of the challenges for manufacturing?
Sure. Thank you, Daryl, for inviting me. We're very proud to be the Wisconsin element in the national NIST MEP national network. So every state has a center like the WCMP, and we all focus on those 98% of the manufacturers that are small or medium-sized. And I think one of the big things that we see affecting our manufacturers is just that the skills gap now has turned into a body gap. Where before, when you had the skills gap, you had jobs over here, you had people over here, trained the people, they could fill the jobs. Now those people are more and more not being there. We're seeing the projections for the workforce for the next 20 years to remain flat. And in fact, the only population age group that's growing in the workforce is 55 and over. So it's a pretty stark picture if you realize that GDP depends on the growth of the workforce plus the growth in productivity. So if you want to have a 3% productivity growth and your workforce is growing at 0, it means you need about a 35% productivity growth over a course of a decade to get that 3%. And the trick to that is we haven't seen that kind of productivity growth since World War II. So in Wisconsin, we focused on that. Our goal is to get individual manufacturers to grow their productivity at 30% or more. And we've undertaken this with the state of Wisconsin to look at how can we make that happen. And what we found out is a couple of things. The first thing is that every manufacturer is different. There might be 100 different solutions that work, but the 3 solutions that work in Company A are not going to be the same 3 solutions that work in Company B that work in Company C. So it's very important to get the most leveraged approaches to that situation. The second thing is that when you attack this, it goes through a very logical progression. Where we see companies starting out is first, if you haven't gone back and looked at why your customers write you a check, how you create value in the last 5 years, chances are you're missing something. And if you jump into automation or applying some other kind of technology, you're going to do one of 2 things. You'll implement the wrong technology in the wrong place in the wrong way, or you'll automate something that shouldn't have been done in the first place. And so then once you have that baseline, you can then move to automation because you know where you can apply the technology. And then ultimately move to connected devices and the Internet of Things because you'll have that base of technology that's working and can be connected. And we're seeing those results of 30% or more.
Okay, David,
Yeah.
What challenges are you seeing in manufacturing and how should we address them?
Well, where should I begin? We have so many, but we have so many opportunities too. So the Manufacturing Leadership Council, part of the NAM, is dedicated to helping manufacturing companies transition to the digital age. And we do a lot of research around this transition. And some of the biggest issues that the manufacturing community is facing in making the transition really fall into 3 categories. One, it's understanding the new technologies that are coming down the pike that they have to incorporate in their companies now to take advantage of the digital trend, things like advanced analytics, artificial intelligence, 3D printing, collaborative robotics, and a variety of other technologies. The second thing they have to understand in order to make the transition is what impact those technologies are going to have on their organizational structures, how they design work, how they organize their companies, how they are going to react and deal with a long-term trend that's been going on from moving from command and control hierarchical structures to more collaborative work environments. And the third piece is what impact this is going to have on leadership within the manufacturing companies. As many of you know, and we've been talking about the workforce issue, one of the major planks of the workforce issue, there's three major planks, but one of the major planks of the workforce issue is the retirement of the baby boomer generation. And this affects all job functions within the manufacturing companies, from plant floor people to people up in the C-suite. So we look at what impact the transition to the digital model is going to have on the leadership piece. And what we have found is that leaders not only have to maintain their competencies around making money, building products, understanding customers, running a company, meeting payroll, but now they also have to develop what we call a new layer of competency called digital acumen. And there's a few parts to digital acumen. Number one, manufacturing leaders have to understand the potential of these new technologies. And it's not just potential around creating new operational efficiencies or higher productivity. It's also around the idea of looking at those technologies, really understanding them and saying, what new business model could I create around those technologies? What new service might I be able to wrap around an existing product based on those technologies? How can I use those technologies to really understand my customers better? This is all about becoming data-centric within the organization. Another key piece of this has to do with understanding the impact, as I mentioned, around the organizational model. As we're going through this shift from command and control to collaborative, leaders are faced with a new challenge. How do I manage employees who are increasingly empowered with more information, where the availability of information is making it possible to move decision-making further down the line? How do I deal with that as a leader in a collaborative environment? That's requiring a great deal of change. And leadership is also faced with the need to, as they think about the trends of digitization going forward, how they're going to operate in a broad ecosystem of partners, customers, and as well as their employees, because it's all about leveraging as many brains, if I can put it that way, within your business ecosystem as you can. The future will be decided, the winners will be decided by those who can really leverage the data effectively within their organizations. So there's a lot of challenges before manufacturing companies now as we move forward on this. And you know, every industry has been disrupted. Hospitality has been disrupted. Transportation has been disrupted. How many people today came here in an Uber? Well, there you go, right? Banking is being disrupted. Medicine is being disrupted. Healthcare is being disrupted. It's manufacturing's turn now, but I think it's a great opportunity to deal with some of the issues that we're facing, not only around productivity, but also this big workforce question that's at the center of everything.
So Cheryl, David makes it sound like you have a really tough job. You're leading a manufacturing company now. You realize you have to do all these things. What are the issues that you're focused on?
Well, I will say one thing. I don't look at them as issues, but opportunities. They are absolutely opportunities.
Absolutely.
And one of the greatest things with manufacturing, and I say this with all honesty, I have probably 35 years in manufacturing, so I visit the hairdresser a lot. We have the greatest asset in the world, and that is, if you caught the drift, I worked for Mr. John Hazenwhite, and so believably we have the same beliefs in the fact that people are everything. People are everything about your companies, your opportunities, your growth, your focus, where it should be. So it's not just about the training, but it's about understanding them. It's about looking across your workforce and saying, wow, I got 4 generations here. TACO will be celebrating 100 years next year. I'm pretty proud of that. But that also means that you have a lot of employees that they've been there for 40 plus, right? And then at the same time, we've hired, I think, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 new people just so far this year. And they're everything from interns, fresh college kids, to people that have 40, 50 years of experience as well, because we really believe in that integration across a workforce. So looking at how to take care of the needs of that kind of a diverse workforce is huge. And then you've all hit on it as well. There's 20% at least of our workforce that's thinking somewhere in the near future of retirement. And when you're looking at a strong manufacturing operation, you're looking at some real expertise that's, as John mentioned, very difficult to replace. So what are we going to do about that? We are going to, internship programs, mentorship programs. The training is for our own people. It's not just for folks out, in our customer base, but, attending a pump class. It's good things to do. Learning how to do a resume or learning how to do an appraisal of your people. Those are all great things that we're constantly training everyone on the inside and out. We've established we've taken our training program also to start looking at Finance 101, Supervision 101, and also making sure that we have a class on the history and the background of a company such as TACO, because when you work with the White family, it's just a legacy you don't want to lose. And carrying that forward is really key to our workforce. Besides that kind of training, you mentioned communication and the information. I think it's fabulous that people have more information. That person on the job, if he knows why he's doing it, what's behind it, what's went wrong, what's went right, there's nobody that can help you more than the person that does the job. Nobody. Long time ago, I knew that if I could just get into the hands of the people doing the job, the information from the financials of what was going wrong, they're the ones that could help you solve it. And we've went a long ways. Somebody mentioned about how Rhode Island is the foundation. If you've ever had the chance to visit Slater's Mill, then you hear the stories on how manufacturing was started with indentured servants and kids. You're not supposed to talk. We don't want your ideas. Put that part to this part and make it happen. But now everyone, you talk about grade levels, I heard that question answered. We're looking about analysts and problem solvers, and it's nothing to walk the floor, as Ben White would know, to find that assembler has somehow managed to get himself a supply chain degree, all right, and is interested in opportunities. Or they, that clerk, that personal assistant you have, just took a class in finance and now is taking on insurance information and taking on one more job. So the dynamics of what's really happening in manufacturing, they're all opportunities. And they're opportunities because we're dealing with people. And that doesn't stop. So you talk about even automation. You go to the guy that, again, maybe he used to count inventory, but now he's carrying these cool looking RF units, right? Those radio frequency scanners to do what they need to do. Or they're labeling, they're putting all their information into an ERP system and actually understanding all the steps of what they need to do. And there was a point in my career where I actually helped teach those classes. And I remember, and I still have, the little angel that one of my ladies gave me back in Ford Motor Company for having not what she thought was save her job, but taught her how to run a computer. And she was so thankful and grateful. And John brought that up as well, that people want to learn. I had a mentor telling me nobody gets up in the out of the day, putting their pants on one leg to the other and saying, let me go see how bad I can do this job. Nobody. So it's on our responsibility. You are right. Leaders have the responsibility of making people feel fulfilled, of engagement. It's not just a communication. It's a two-way. It's communicate and engage. I had a director of organizational development in my HR department just inform me that the other day. No, it's not a communication plan. It's an engagement and communicate. Okay. She's absolutely right, because people want to feel as part of the growth. They're important, and at TACO they get to do that, and it's pretty exciting. So it's not challenges, it's fun.
Yep.
Especially when you work with him.
Okay, so Buckley, we've been hearing about the need for organizational development, the challenges of an aging workforce, how to integrate IT into new business practices. The companies that you work with in Wisconsin, how are they navigating this new terrain?
Well, it's a challenge for them because they're smaller companies, and so I like what John said earlier. I don't recognize the skills gap. What we see are those companies that are at the leading edge don't see that. They're getting their pick of the crop of people who want to come to work for them. The issue is with when you start looking at the workforce that's available now, you're into non-traditional areas, people who are chronically unemployed, who are disabled, who are recently incarcerated. So on the positive side, there's now an economic incentive to bring those folks back into the economy and back into the workforce. And with the smaller companies, they have to do smaller experiments. You know, for a General Motors to invest $1 million and try something out and have it not work, okay, it's $1 million. But for Bill's bait shop and metal bending, $1 million could be more than they even sell in a year. So those experiments have to be small, and I think what we're going to see is a real change in learning. I mean, we're going to all have to be constant learners, and I think the structures that we've had in the past to teach are going to have to adapt to that too, to people who are, you know, older coming back in and saying, hey, how do I retool so that I'm actually relevant with the technologies that are going forward?
So David, in the national survey that we did, we found 50% said they think the government should be doing more to help the manufacturing sector. So I'm just curious, in your perspective, what do you want from government? Are there particular incentives or programs that you think would be helpful, or do you just want them to stay out of the way and not interfere?
No, I actually believe that for us to be able to make the journey to a digital future, it's going to require education, it's going to require the government, it's going to require manufacturers, and it's going to require the general public to understand what the transition is going to be for us to make this. We need a community, a coalition to make this transition successful. It's way too big just for the manufacturing sector itself to try to undertake, because we need qualified people coming from the educational community in who have these digital skills. We need government to put in place policies and incentives for investment and innovation around the digital model. We need manufacturers to really pick up the pace in the United States with this whole thing, because our studies have indicated we are somewhat behind other countries like Germany and Japan in this race. This race is going to define the 21st century, I believe. That those countries whose companies successfully embrace the digital model will be the powers of the 21st century, because manufacturing is the core of the economy. So there's a lot at stake here. And just to go back to the core of your question, the government is actually doing a lot more than a lot of people think. In October of last year, the Commerce Department put out what it called the National Strategy for Advanced Manufacturing. And this was an effort that had gone on for over a year. It involved multiple federal agencies. They did about 22 focus-like groups around the country. The NAM held one in January of 2018. They published this big report essentially calling for the coalition I'm talking about. In October, this is pursuant to the 2010 law that was passed during the Obama administration that created the institutes, the 14 institutes. So by law, they have to update this strategy every certain number of years. So they came out with this report. It's actually quite good as a starting point. The problem with it is not many people know about it. Does anybody in the audience have ever heard about it? One or two hands. So we need to get greater exposure and awareness about some of the things that are already going on with this, because a lot of good work has been done and a lot of the pathway has been cleared on this already. It's also true on the workforce side. There's a tremendous amount of things going on to deal with the workforce issue. As many of you know, we have hundreds of thousands of jobs open in manufacturing. The latest numbers that we have at the NAM is that there's about 509,000 open jobs in manufacturing as of May. We're projecting that by 2018, there's going to be 4.6 million open jobs in manufacturing. The good news is there's a lot of companies that are attacking it, making relationships and alliances with their local colleges and universities. They're developing new programs at the HR level to attract employees. We spend a lot of time at the council, at the Manufacturing Leadership Council, advising our members on employee engagement, exactly what you had mentioned. In fact, we're about to publish an article next month that advocates taking an idea from the consumer space, which we all know is called the customer experience, and creating in manufacturing what we would call the employee experience. So we can move that needle beyond just engagement to something where we can really work the whole issue of retaining employees, making them feel that they have fulfilling work, and wanting to pursue a lifelong career in manufacturing. So we're all working on this. I don't know how many of you noticed, but last week the NAM made a major announcement around a new program called Creators Wanted. This is going to be an 18-month initiative by the NAM, one of the biggest in its history, that is going to go out into the manufacturing community, and the goal is to raise $10 million to fund a digital campaign to raise awareness of the future of manufacturing and the great aspects of having a career in manufacturing. We're going to be doing a nationwide tour of up to 25 locations, I'm sorry, in the United States, kind of a mobile tour to show people firsthand what modern manufacturing looks like. It's not the dirty, dark, dangerous, it's not your father's Oldsmobile. Remember that old saying? Your father's Oldsmobile manufacturing anymore. It's really changing. In fact, and there's other aspects to the Creators Wanted campaign. You're going to hear more about this as we go forward. But just to sum up, I think that, you know, as long as I've been in manufacturing, and probably as long as you've been in manufacturing, and John and everybody else, the jobs issue, the skills gap issue has been a front burner issue. And we've worked at it from many, many different angles. But now something has changed. The man on the white horse we've been looking for has arrived, and it's called digitization. This is the thing that's going to change people's minds and perceptions about manufacturing. Once they get a look at it and understand it, the type of jobs that you're going to be able to have in manufacturing going forward, it's going to turn on a whole new light about what manufacturing is. And that dark, dirty, dangerous image is going to be completely blotted out by this new light. That's my belief and my hope. I think we're at an inflection point. It's a huge opportunity. And if we can make the most of it, we can completely turn around that perception and start supplying those people we need in the workforce.
Interesting.
Can I add to
Sure.
that a little bit? Because the congressman mentioned a little bit about Rhode Island's real jobs efforts. And I had an opportunity to sit with our governor on the Workforce Development Council. And what you ended up with government supporting the relationship between companies in need, such as TACO or even Hope Global, as, where I came from, as well as the amazing universities that are around us, and bringing those together. And TACO has now taken that and is working on a very structured program of working with the universities and talking about their supply chain classes or their engineer groups or their capstone or their marketing groups, and finding out and tying that to what do our own executives need and help and solve this problem for us on the floor. What can you do with us? And what you end up finding is you bring these young adults, these bright minds in, and then you create a job because you cannot let that person go. That's called job creation, right? It's not that I've got the job to fill it, but wow, let's create whatever this is so that we keep doing these kind of things. And so tying and utilizing your universities and letting that awareness happen, because it is about awareness. We've done internships for high school students and just taken them through from an engineering department to the AutoCAD group to the guy on the floor that's learning about facility management, or how to set up a tool crib, or the finance guy. I mean, there's such a diversity. It's not just the assembler. It's not just the guy working in the warehouse driving a forklift. There is so much in manufacturing and so many opportunities that no one knows about. To be a master scheduler or a buyer that's dealing with India and China and all of the supply chain that we're dealing out there, that's not little stuff. So the opportunities are really tremendous, and I think that awareness is just coming back around, that manufacturing is absolutely important, and there's opportunities for growth.
Yeah.
And I
I know
think
in your opening remarks, you also mentioned about the importance of communications and engagement. And in your company, you have an interesting situation in the sense that because you have very low turnover, you have 4 to 5 generations that are working side by side. So you have an aging workforce and then young kids.
And they all want something different, by the way.
And that's what I wanted to ask you. How do you deal with that particular configuration?
By doing exactly what John talked about and listening to them. I mean, so you have an aging workforce that's getting older, and they don't have the little kids, so maybe the camp doesn't work. So this last year, instead of a fancy awards dinner, we my 10-year-old, by the way, thought this was really amazing. I heard her tell her girlfriend on the phone, Mama's company just shut down the zoo and took over. So she was so excited she couldn't believe it, that we literally opened up Roger Williams Zoo, when you talk about joining community, and had over 700 of our employees and families that came to that day, and everybody absolutely loved it. And so listening to what they're looking for. Talking about the flex hours, I heard somebody talking about that. When I came in, there's no quite start and stop time in a lot of areas, and how we're all engaged in figuring out what works for this group, but what works for that. And you got that group that's been 40 years, and I like coming to work right here, and I like knowing what I have to do and going home on time, because they've got that other life. So you have to listen. It's so key, and then follow through on it. There is a list there's everything from Johnny's Clock House Tower meetings to the town hall meetings to the luncheon efforts, the train, and that's just beyond the training. There's just constant communication at all levels of engagement. And the deal with is no agenda. Just go in, talk, listen, and work back and forth. That's what's creating and enhancing the culture, which is back to some of the other things I've heard about. Culture is everything. People need to be happy going to work. They do great things when they're happy.
I think we're going to see that. I think we're going to see a couple things change too. One is that when people realize that there's not another employee at the door, you're going to treat those folks that are in-house a lot better than what you maybe have before, when you could say, well, Cheryl's not doing the job, we'll get rid of her and find somebody else come in. If the spot market for labor is going to be 0 for the next 20 years, you're going to think a lot differently about how you approach Cheryl before you do that. And the other piece of this is we're seeing, when you talked before about how industry's moving towards education, we're seeing education move towards industry too, in that all of our technical colleges now in Wisconsin have industry advisory panels where they are active partners with what's being offered to industry. And the state has gotten involved too. We're providing what they call fast forward grants to actually fund targeted training for particular manufacturers. So it's having a big impact.
And David, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to make a comment that also something was on the other panel, which I found really interesting. Just to go back to this, the numbers problem that we're dealing with here in the industry, and the impact of automation and advanced technologies on the overall workforce. Of course, there's going to be an impact, but our problem is not displacing people. Our problem is filling the open jobs. So the retraining is absolutely critical so we can reallocate people. And I really empathize with what Molly said about how difficult it is for people to make this transition. I had to make one in mid-career myself, and it wasn't easy. So I feel that too. But when I think about it, We're the people who make things. And if we can make a jet engine, if we can make a medicine that cures a disease, if we can make a microchip circuit that has more information on it than the entire Library of Congress, we can figure out how to retrain if we put our minds to it. We have some of the best minds. I come out of the publishing industry. The manufacturing industry has some of the best minds I've ever encountered. If we put our minds to it, we can lick the retraining issue. Because if we can do those other things, we can do this too. It's a man-made problem. If it's a man-made problem, man can solve it.
Hey, I like your optimism on that front.
Yeah.
He's absolutely right.
Let's open the floor to questions and comments. Again, if you can give us your name and your organization. Yes.
Hey, my name is Alex Dadek with Fahi, and I was curious, I'm really happy about the optimism as well. It often seems like these are questions, those are sort of political will questions to sort of implement, things to catch people before they fall, and so I'm wondering if you could talk about that, but also particularly with, if you could address how you see labor unions fitting into this conversation. I haven't heard a whole lot of in-depth discussion about labor unions, and in the past, those organizations provided impetus for sort of retraining and programs and sort of the solidarity of taking care of each other that I think we maybe see a little bit missing in not their company represented here today, but in many companies around the country. Thank you.
Okay. Responses?
I think labor unions have to be part of the coalition. They're one of the constituencies. We have to have the voice at the table. There'll be other constituencies perhaps we haven't thought of, local communities that need to be constituencies in this movement to the digital era, which is what I'm talking about. Everybody needs to be at that table to make this a successful transition. People have stakes in it. They're going to have a lot of opportunity in it. There's going to be other challenges, but we all have to deal with it together if we're going to successfully make the journey. That's my perspective on it.
So I come from the automotive world, starting with GM, Mazda, Ford, Lear Corporation. Worked with labor unions in Mexico to Canada and across the world. So I've got a really mixed bag of what's good or bad in both. But I think David hit it right. The fact is, if you're going to succeed, and that's what we want to do, we all want to succeed, right? The suppliers want to succeed, the customers want to succeed, the people want to succeed. They want to come to work and they want to be a success, and the company needs to succeed to thrive. So everybody's got to be in the same boat. And it doesn't do any good to point and say, I'm sorry, but you're into the boat's leaking, because you're in the same boat. So we have to fix together all these issues, and it can't be back from the days of labor against, management. That doesn't work no more. To come in and ask, are you paying a shift premium for, of course we are. The things that need to be done right are being done right. Now let's figure out how to go forward and improve upon it in the next age. So everybody needs to be at the same table. And I would say the same thing whether it's in the political realm, all right? There's a lot of stuff going on in the world, across the world. We talk about being global and then having impact and understanding what your actions do as a company. And as Johnny said, we are across the world, but we are not there because of cost reasons. We're there because of a vertical integration and strategic place. But that doesn't mean that, we shouldn't implement in our Vietnam plant a pay card instead of handing people a pile of cash and sending them out into the street. Knowing it's not safe and what socially should happen, it doesn't matter where it's at. So when you think global and local, then there's right. And I don't really care what realm it comes from. I don't think the way it used to be works. And it has to be everybody in the boat for true success. There's no more Lone Rangers.
And I think where we started this with the challenge is forcing all of us to play a much more focused role in doing the right things. I mean, it's not only good for it's not only good for the business, it's good for society, and you need it to be able to succeed. I think one area that we get absolutely sidetracked with is, if we need more people, can we really step up and start talking about immigration in something that's less than screaming tones?
We just got done with a 3-day strategy meeting with the top, as many people as we could fit in the room that we got, and battled out where we were headed as a company, right? Everybody talked, everybody got into it, but we started and came to a full conclusion. Our vision starts with the words that TACO is dedicated to promoting the success of our employees, our customers, our partners, in our communities that we do work with, for the betterment of all. All right, so when you believe, when absolutely everyone believes that that's where you're going and that's what we're committed to doing, then you can't help but have it happen.
Other questions?
I'm Jing Hong from National School Boards Association. Like as you said just now, education is moving towards industry. NSBA, since this year, we initiated life-ready skills. So we study skills gap. From the manufacturing perspective, what do you think that school leaders should prepare the K-12 students for this the future with or challenge brought by the automation technology?
One of the areas that I would bring out, and in fact, Bryant University got with TACO because we had come across this because of our training center. But there is a huge move to digital training, putting on the goggles and learning how to do your job in building a pump. And watching, and everybody was standing around with this guy standing there with absolutely nothing in front of him with goggles on his head running a job. So that kind of thinking, those kind of classes on everything a workforce is looking for, that's where our education needs to go.
Yeah, and one of the big effects of digitization, and we've been talking about this at the council since its inception, is it kind of starts to force what we call cross-functional integration in the company. Most manufacturing companies, most companies of any type over the years have really been built around silos. And the digital technology now enables us to kind of break down those silos. And in manufacturing, some manufacturing companies are now experimenting and even implementing what we call the digital thread, to tie together in a full life cycle, 360-degree life cycle paradigm, for example, a product's life. Everything from conception to design, to building the product, to shipping the product, to the customer, the service of the product at the customer, and then back in a digital loop. So when you have this sort of effect within the company, it completely changes how you have to go about managing things within the company. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this going forward, and it's going to affect how we do things and how you manage. It's going to affect, if I can put it this way, the politics of the company, because we know that power exists with information and that sort of thing. It's going to kind of break that down in much more of a meritocracy, I believe, going forward. And I think coming out of it, we're going to be able to be much, much faster, much more agile, and we're going to be able to supply products to customers that are much more precise as to what they want. The whole mass customization trend. So I'm very optimistic about it.
And I want to pick up on that agility theme in the sense that in terms of preparing young people for the future, I would really emphasize the importance of soft skills. And
Just going to say,
Yeah.
All three.
you cannot lose that.
because one of the interesting insights from Charles Darwin when he was discussing evolution was he said survival is going to go not to the strongest or the most intelligent, but the most adaptable. And I've always thought that as we're moving to the digital era, that insight is really important.
Yeah.
Because we're heading into an era of massive change on every front. Technology change, business model change, geopolitical changes on the global landscape. Young people are going to live through much more change than I have lived through over the last few decades. And so therefore, one of the best skills they're going to need is just adaptability, resilience, being able to see changes that are taking place and figure out how it's going to affect them. I don't know exactly how to teach those types of skills, but those are skills that will be very valuable in the future.
Some of them are experiential.
I take it one more step too. I would say the adaptability personally, but the ability to bring other people along with you and be able to work in a team and move that team forward to a goal. That's becoming more and more important the more technology becomes part of the factory.
Yeah, and if I can build on what you said, Daryl, along with those soft skills, we need now, and we're going to need even more in the future, people who have real critical thinking skills, collaborative skills. This whole cross-functional movement requires people to work in environments with people from functions that are very different than those that they're in. One of the things we spend a lot of time for the last number of years on at the council is how do we bring together in a manufacturing company the OT people and the IT people? Everybody's struggling with it. They speak different languages. They have different perspectives about the technology. A person on the factory floor in operations technology, they look at a piece of technology and they look at it, that's going to be there for 25 years. That's how they think about it. On the IT side, 18 months. Follows Moore's law, right? So bringing these two groups together in companies has been a real challenge for most manufacturing companies. They're working on it. They're trying to make headway on it. A lot of them are starting to succeed with it, but we're going to see a lot more of it kind of across the life cycle going forward.
I gotta add to that soft skills thing though. Show up on time, respect people. You know, we say that we're full of the world of meetings, but
Yeah.
do you know how it is to have a number of people sitting there and everybody waiting? Respect other people's opinions. We just got done when I was talking about this strategy meeting. We started with what are the rules of engagement? Shut your electronics off. I mean, yes, okay, it's digital. Shut your electronics off. Listen to people. You know, it's interesting, we're sitting in a four-way stop, and again, my 10-year-old said, Mom, do they know who's supposed to go first? I said, well, they're supposed to take turns. And she goes, we learned that in kindergarten. But we forget some of these things. Take turns, listen to other people, some of these basic those soft skills, and don't be afraid to work. And, yes, go do that job. You see it needs work. You need somebody needs help. Just don't be afraid to do those things. And how we teach them, I don't know. I'm in the Midwest as well, so I learned it on a farm, so I don't know what to say to that. But
Right there's a question.
Hi, I'm Marilyn Houston. I saw a study by PGIM recently that said that by 2030, 70% of all of the world's cities will have had rapid urbanization occurring, right? And so what kind of planning do you do in the manufacturing sector when you think about where you're going to source your resources, so rare earth minerals and, copper and all of those, as the population demographics globally explode? There's a demand everywhere by manufacturers and infrastructure planners and so forth to be able to meet those demands. But I'm sure there's a fight for those resources. How are you planning that over the next 10 to 12 years?
Well, John hit it on. People's not the problem; it's materials, right? And it's on-time deliveries, and it's there's all sorts of phrases from the just-in-time to the consignments, and how do you deal with the getting the supply chain from India and China and building all of this up as well. So it's critical. There's numerous programs being studied. You can't carry millions of dollars of inventory to be prepared for the distance of where your supplies are at, right? So how you deal with it and how people are, back to your commentary, I think the good part is, even though that urbanization, you've got the community is not being as lost as everyone thinks. There really is absolutely this wonderful world of building closer and helping each other. You get down into automotive, they actually will bring all of their supply bases right on house, and they build upon this fracture that, come inside this walls because we're all going to work together kind of thing. So there's so many different programs out there. What's the best one? I think it's individualistic.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's kind of a story about this. So we started studying future production models at the council maybe 7-8 years ago, and when we first started going into this, I kind of had in my mind that the result we were going to get out of this was that companies were going to create real big mega super factories. This is what it was going to be. I was fairly quickly disabused of that notion because what was really going on was production was and still is becoming democratized. We now have the ability production-wise to put production capability much more locally, much more close to the source. You'll see an explosion of additive 3D printing manufacturing production means in many, many areas where even the big companies, even a big automotive company, you may need an automotive part rather than them shipping it to you. They'll send a signal to a 3D printer in your house, and you'll make the part yourself, and you'll put it in your car. So the model of production is shifting. And I think what we're going to see is if the urbanization trend holds out, we'll see production capability much closer to the source.
I agree with that, but I don't think it's going to go all the way to that. Everybody's making their own parts, because there are a couple things that this new technology does take capital. So you need a certain amount of scale to be able to implement that new technology. And when you implement that technology, then every time you connect to the internet, you also have a cybersecurity threat. Mm-hmm. So implementing those safety features also takes money and effort, and it takes a little bit more scale than just everybody being able to do that. And at the tail end of the supply chain, that's what we're finding out right now, is that that's where cyber criminals are coming in now and coming up the chain.
But I have to ask about the 800-pound gorilla on this supply chain issue is just all the geopolitical changes that are taking place at a very rapid pace. So I'm just curious how that is affecting the people you work with, or in your case, the work that you're doing. How does it affect, where you're ordering materials? Let it be recorded.
It's not a gorilla. It's not a gorilla. It's an elephant. It's difficult. There's no good way around it. But no one's winning at this right now. All right. So you start talking of tariffs. What happens? Parts go up. Somebody's going to buy a furnace for your house. Who do you think's going to pay? It just keeps getting pushed along, right? And nobody's winning. So that's one piece to it. But to go all the way back, companies are finding methods. I mean, my head of the supply chain for Takeo right now is in India, and talking to these suppliers and saying, we got to work together. Remember that boat thing. What can you do? What can we do so that we can meet the needs of our customer? That's what has to happen. So, and it doesn't matter, whether government's making it easy or hard. That's what you have to do. And there's some that are not surviving. And there's regulations that are being put in place. The Department of Energy putting in certain restrictions that you must be to this level by the end of the year or you cannot ship. Companies better be listening and keeping track of those kind of regulations. And they're for the better, right? We need to do them. And John made a comment once. In many cases, Europe is already there. They've implemented this stuff. They're working on cleaner air. They're working on what they should be doing. We got to get on board and do the same things, and we got to be listening to those kind of regulations. But at the end of the day, everybody's in the same boat, and you got to work together, and you got to come up with solutions, and you got to figure out how are you going to make that supply chain flow like it's supposed to, or the customer goes somewhere else.
Okay, Antoine, there's a microphone coming up behind you.
You talked about collaboration with universities in the area of training. I wonder whether you also can look at them for the fruit of their research in terms of new materials, in terms of new production techniques. Do you work with them on that as well?
I haven't, I believe, to be perfectly honest, 6 months at TACO. I just touched on the borders of it, and they absolutely have many times. We also did when I was at Hope Global with the textile universities. And some of the brightest minds in these universities with the teachers and the faculty. Yes, the answer is absolutely yes. The smart company is doing it every time. So I would say both from Hope and TACO, they have reached out and looking at new products and saying, we need a product that's going to do this. Help us out. Ideas are out there.
And what's your experience in Wisconsin?
Well, I mean, our experience is that the universities work very well with the larger companies. You know, that when you go to the university, one of the universities, the first thing they're going to be figuring out is, I need some funding for this research. And so for a small or medium manufacturer, it's very difficult for them to connect. It's also very difficult from a time frame perspective. You know, small or medium manufacturers looking to a 12 to 18 month ROI on an investment that they make. And a lot of times when you talk to the researchers at a university, they're saying, well, we'll get this down to where it's within 3 years of being market ready, and then we'll move it into one of your manufacturers and help us get it the rest of the way. Well, you know, those manufacturers have orders to get out, and they're not really, their purpose for being is not to further their research, and sometimes that gets flipped around the wrong way. Where we're seeing real collaboration is around issues that are affecting broad swaths of industry, whether it's the water cluster that we have, there's a real good link there, or now with our Connected Systems Institute, bringing that technology all the way through the supply chain and right to the factory floor. Where the more practical it gets, the easier it is to engage.
Companies are engaging too.
And when I moved from a university here, what I noticed was at universities, the timeline is months and years. Here, it's days and months, and sometimes hours. So, it's a different timeline at universities. Any other questions? Yes, in the very back.
Hi, I'm Carter. I'm a high school student from Australia. You were talking.
Thank you for coming out.
No, thank you for having me. You were talking a lot before about the coalition of different stakeholders in the manufacturing sector coming together to work out this digital shift. I wanted to ask, how do you envision that coming about? And do you have any particular things in mind, like certain coalitions, like alliances or groups coming together to meet annually or quarterly to discuss that?
But you know, it is a long way to come from Australia. We are webcasting this. So.
In the summer.
Let me, you know, one example of that in Wisconsin is we have a Connected Systems Institute, and what we have there is the state of Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Rockwell Automation, and then several other entities that are all engaged around, you know, how can we take the research from the lab, how can we apply it practically to applications that are going to arise in the next few years, and then really make it affordable for manufacturers throughout the state and throughout the country. But there has to be an alignment of purpose. Sometimes you don't get that. You know, the researcher wants one thing, the state wants something else, the company wants a third thing, and that's when it falls apart. Where it works really well is where you have that alignment, and getting that alignment can be really difficult, especially when you start talking about competitive companies or IP.
I could add a little bit to that. I mean, I think there's a lot going on right now at the local level, state level, with the state organizations, the MEP organizations. At the NAM, we have been doing, I think, for 7 years now, what we call Manufacturing Day. And last year, in 2018, I think the number was, I think, we had we engaged 3,000 manufacturing companies to open their doors to students, the community, legislators, all of the constituents to come in and see what a manufacturing company looks like. So it's not one thing that we're going to be doing that's going to be able to move the needle here. We need to be doing lots of things. Lots of things are going on. We need to do more of it. We need to make things like this new national strategy for advanced manufacturing much better known than it is. Get discussion around it. Get Congress to fund it, which is a really important part, and move forward on multiple fronts.
Okay, we have time for one last question, right here on the aisle.
Thank you again. I guess primarily to my neighbor from Wisconsin.
On Wisconsin.
Right. At least with the paper industry, historically, the floor jobs in the manufacturing went to men, and they didn't go to immigrants, they didn't go to the Hmong, and they didn't go to women. And if you had something where you had to check a criminal box, they didn't go to those people either. So I'm wondering, since now in many areas there's actually a shortage of workers, are you seeing any more flexibility on the immigrant, the female, the ban-the-box sort of employment impediments of the past?
Tremendous. I mean, it's whole constituencies that employers would never consider 3 or 4 years ago are now being considered. There's an extensive initiative through the state technical college system to work with soon-to-be released prisoners to gain new skills. They're being lapped up very quickly. You know, we see initiatives going into particular communities. You mentioned the Hmong community. You know, we've have manufacturers that have a direct pipeline in there because they understand how that piece of community works. They work hard. Sure, you have to do some things with language and culture, but now it's worth it. I think our major opportunity right now, so when we're sitting at such a low unemployment level, is that we have this opportunity to pull this whole class of people out of poverty and solidly into the middle class. But we have to use a little bit of ingenuity to do it. And I'm seeing some cracks, but I'd like to see a lot more.
So when you have the diversity day and everyone brings potluck and you fly 42 flags within the company, you know that the immigration is in there. And like Johnny said, having English as a second language and the GED and the citizens, all of those classes internally, those are happening. And the fact that women work hard and are now often the sole breadwinners in their homes, that fact is that's pretty solid. They're amazing workers. Nobody is turning them away.
Okay, we're out of time, but I want to thank Buckley, David, and Cheryl for sharing their insights. And if you'd like to see our survey results, check it out at brookings.edu. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe for more videos from Brookings.